I think generally people suffer in silence because I feel like for so many issues we say God digala, which it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be. I think the more that you talk about it, the more you'll find how many people relate and how many shared experiences that we have so we can all collectively, I think all these issues are at the community level. Earlier you mentioned, like Jat, for example. I think oftentimes when it comes to even the person that you want to marry, that what your parents want for you, there is a conflict, and that applies to like what they want for you career-wise. I think a lot of people face pressure, you have to go down this path. And I think even when it comes to marriage, your parents have an idea of who they want you to marry.
Generally speaking, to all the women in Punjabi culture, we've grown up in Punjabi household. We've seen the goods and the bads. What do you think is bad in our Punjabi culture? Let's just start with the bad.
Okay, so we're just gonna skip over the good and start with the bad. Okay, I would say I can narrow it down to two things that a lot of people can relate to, especially women. The first is Loki Gange. I think that is very prevalent within our families, within our community, that we give so much emphasis to other people and we put what they think, their opinions above our own mental health, our own well-being, what we might want for our lives. And I feel like we need to be the generation that ends that. And then second, which is also really important, is I think that we have such an emphasis on marriage, especially for women from a young age. And I don't think that is healthy because I feel like all it does is really add pressure where you just feel like I need to find someone and, I need to get married, where the reality is that everyone has a different timeline, and a marriage shouldn't be the only goal in life. But I think that often your personal and your professional accomplishments are really overlooked. You could be doing great at your job, you could be doing great, getting your education, but I feel like you're always going to have those relatives that are going to be like, oh, like viaah kado karana or viaah nahi karaya, and then that really makes you, I think, feel like, is that like your only, value that, you're adding, or is that the only thing that matters?
And I think I've seen this is gonna be funny, but I've seen more is like the relatives care more about tadi kudi hundi pi hai vaddi ho rahi ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਦੋਂ ਵਿਆਹ ਕਰਾਉਣਾ than their own parents. And I think it's time for parents to step up and just be like, okay, and no, it's her decision when to get married. It's her decision when she's gonna find the right person. We're not gonna put too much pressure on her, because I think it's end of the day it's more important about who she settles with. If the person is responsible in her life, it's the marriage is about two people, not the community and jaat paat no like.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that people honestly, they just want a wedding, they want to have fun, they're gonna eat their butter chicken, they're gonna have their drinks, and they're gonna go home. And it's the people that are getting married that are entering into a lifelong commitment. But one thing is that we don't really know, we're not really taught how to even have healthy relationships, and marriage is going to require a lot of, the words adjusting and compromise are really thrown around, but I think we need a distinction between that and making a lot of sacrifices, which can result in you, losing yourself, because a lot of that falls on women. Oftentimes women are the ones that are moving, they're living with their in-laws, they're adjusting to a whole new life. And I think that we don't necessarily prepare people for that healthy relationship and that marriage, but it's just like get to the end goal, get to your lama, and that's all that matters.
What have you seen in our parents' generation, their marriage situation? How was that, and how was it different than our generation?
I think our parents' lives are so different from ours. I think first and foremost, the fact that they were born and raised in another country. I think oftentimes parents got married at a, fairly young age, and it was kind of like you had to make it work, and then if you add the fact that they moved from India to another country, then they're like in survival mode, and they have to succeed here, and they have kids, and they have so many responsibilities that I don't think everyone, each family is different, but I think oftentimes we don't have that example of what that healthy marriage looks like. I think that there was just so much pressure on them. But one good thing is that we recognize that we don't want to repeat the mistakes, of prior generations were much more intentional about how we want our marriage to look like, how we want to be as parents, the things that we want to pass down. And there are amazing things about, the Punjabi culture. I feel like being Punjabi is more of a feeling,
Yes.
You meet another Punjabi and you connect with them because you have those shared experiences. I think like our, music, our language is so beautiful, but at the same time, there are these aspects that, are problematic that I do believe it's our responsibility to be aware of that, to have that self-awareness, and to make sure that, it ends with us. So we're not telling our daughters like, from a young age, like, oh, what are your in-laws going to say? Or, we don't have those gender roles within our families.
One thing that I like about our generation is that we're open to talk about our traumas. I know when I was dating my husband, we openly talked about our past, and we discussed, okay, how we should bring the best out of each other so that it doesn't affect us, our relationship, and how we can overcome that and create a happy environment between us, so that we give that happy environment to our future kids. And I think it's really important to talking about our traumas, which in our Punjabi culture, we're not taught that. Our parents don't have the idea of, okay, traumas does exist from generation to generation, but it's our responsibility to end it. First of all, is to recognize that we're dealing with traumas.
Yeah, I think our parents' generation really didn't recognize mental health. So I think that's definitely a huge difference, us being more open about it, getting rid of the stigma around it. I do believe that each person, has to do the work and has to heal before they enter a relationship. I think your partner can definitely support you, but that responsibility falls on you, and you want to make sure that we're breaking those cycles and not continuing them.
In marriages, the pressure is on women, right? To see, our biological clock ho rahi hai.
Yeah.
You need to get married.
Yeah.
But I think it's also a financial clock on men also. And ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਕਲਚਰ ਵਿੱਚ men ਦੀ mental health ਬਾਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ.
I completely agree with that. I think generally people suffer in silence because I feel like for so many issues we say God digala, which it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be. I think the more that you talk about it, the more you'll find how many people relate and how many shared experiences that we have, so we can all collectively, I think all these issues are at the community level. Earlier you mentioned like Jat, for example. I think oftentimes when it comes to even the person that you want to marry, that what your parents want for you, there is a conflict, and that applies to like what they want for you career-wise. I think a lot of people face pressure, you have to go down this path. And I think even when it comes to marriage, your parents have an idea of who they want you to marry, and they have, religion requirements or ethnicity or whatever it might be. And I think there's so many situations in which, people conflict with their parents and they're not able to, marry who they want.
This is actually deep.
But like generally I feel like we almost feel like we owe our parents a lot, because of everything that they've done. And we feel some level of guilt, I think, for the experiences that we get to have that they didn't get to have, So I think that when we're talking about identity, it gets lost somewhere along the way. You have your parents, you have the culture, you have the community, and you have yourself. And not all of those things, not all of those people are always going to be on the same page,
No, I totally agree with you. And I think like your identity should come first, then your community, then your parents, then your spouse. Because if you don't know about yourself, how are you going to support your community? How are you going to support your spouse?
Yeah. And, I think that, it's very hard to believe, because what I'm about to say next, it feels like such an outdated belief. But I think for as long as, I don't even know when it began, I think that it was always seen that having a daughter is a burden, because you're going to get her married, the concept of dowry, she's going to get married. And I think back in the day, once you got married, you barely ever even saw your parents, so it was always the sons are going to support you, but your daughter isn't, and she's going to get married and go into her own house. So I feel like it's so hard to accept the fact that even till this day, people still feel this way. And like speaking on something personal, I do know that when I was born, there was like, disappointment within the family of like kuri hoi. And I know that that still happens to this day. Like if we have a son, we're gonna apa laddu vandane, And if you have a daughter, I think people don't hide their disappointment. So if that's how, I think that's a little bit of like where all of this comes from.
When you came to know about from your family that, okay, you were told this, okay, oh my God, kudi paida ho gaya.
Yeah.
When you learned about this, how did you took it? And did it impact you in any way?
I think it definitely did. I think it made me realize that this is an issue in our community where people, have this preference and people are not afraid to vocalize that, and it makes you feel like, you were not wanted. But I think that it also motivated me to make sure that I proved myself. Think that the only way that people are going to really learn is, by you showing them. Of course, you can have conversations, and I think that something that's very, very important is to hold people accountable. I think it all starts within our families and within our communities. If someone makes a comment like that, to have a conversation with them and hold them accountable. I don't think that we should let these things, go, because this is not what we would want like our daughters to hear in the future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I feel like at a certain point, I did definitely have this conversation with my dad, where I was like, I feel like I proved that Kuriyan vi barabar and mundiyan to ghat nahi, and I don't think that, we should, this is definitely like a way of thinking that should end with us.
Have you thought about if you're going to have daughter in the future, what are the things you're going to tell her?
Definitely not going to talk about marriage. I think that I would want her to have every opportunity possible, especially all the opportunities that I feel like I didn't have. I think that the most important thing that kids want is for their parents to just show up and support them. I think we can all relate that our parents hardly ever tell us that they're proud of us or that they love us. And, I think oftentimes we do feel like there is a little bit of a disconnect there, like that generational, gap. I think that, of course, we know that, our parents care about us, but I think sometimes we're like, how much do you actually know us, And I think as you get older, you definitely want to improve that relationship with them. But we have to also understand, we have to give them grace and be patient with them, because there's so many experiences that we've had that they haven't, like thinking from the mindset of them coming to a completely different country where they have to, all these challenges of putting food on the table and like taking care of the whole family. Not only did they take care of their family here, they're probably taking care of their family in India, So they did a lot that all these things that we're thinking about, maybe they just necessarily didn't have the time. But I feel like in us working towards healing ourselves, we can potentially, help them heal as well.
But no, it totally makes sense, especially when we have to keep this in mind that it's a totally different generational gap. What we've seen in our day and age with the computers, with technology, we've learned a lot than what they have learned.
Yeah, and I think our generation also has more self-awareness. I think we're able to figure out, what things are good and what things, might not be good for us. And I think that our parents very much, followed prior generations and maybe weren't thinking about, how can I, what necessarily needs to be changed. But I think that just because, we've thought a certain way for a long time or done things a certain way for a long time doesn't, make it right. Like, I think that more recently there have been a lot of initiatives. For example, if you take the holiday of Lodi, now people celebrate that for girls. That wasn't always the case, So I think that we are taking those steps.
What do you mean by that, Lodi?
So Lodi was usually celebrated for the birth of a boy, like when you have a son, yeah. And now people are celebrating it for their daughters.
I did not know that.
Yeah. You can fact check me.
I did not know that. Oh, wow. I think we've talked a lot about the things that we can improve in Punjabi culture. Let's move on to things that we like about Punjabi culture.
I think there's so many things to love about the Punjabi culture. Definitely our food, our music, our clothes. I think our weddings are beautiful. I think that, everyone can relate to that feeling of going to Punjab and just feeling like they belong there and that's your home no matter how long it's been. And the way that, you just connect with other Punjabi people. You get just so excited when you meet someone and you have all these shared experiences. But I think it's important to note that there is a huge difference between Punjabi culture and our religion, and that's not talked about enough, right? Because our culture, there's so many problematic aspects like we talked about earlier, but all this wisdom, all this knowledge, all this guidance is truly within our religion. And I think that people often follow the culture and not the religion, and that's something that we can definitely improve upon, because we talked about women and we talked about misogyny, but if you looked at our religion, we would be both, men and women are supposed to be treated equal, but we see that's not implemented because of our culture.
Our Sikh women fought in the wars during the Mughal empires, and when they were like taking over our Sikh religion, like our women stepped up and they fought for our religion, and that's only because Guru Nanak Dev Ji ne kya siga ki like men and women are treated equally.
And I think it can be a little bit disheartening when we have these experiences that we're talking about, just because our religion goes back to like 500 years, like more than 500 years. And, these are all the things that we were taught, and yet we still have not been able to implement them. I think that there's definitely a lot of progress to be made. Another difference between our parents' generation and us is that I feel like our parents didn't really have boundaries. They felt like they needed to help out every single family member, or if anyone needs anything, you put those people above yourself, even though it might be at your own detriment. And I think that we're being much more intentional about what we can and can't do for people, or if someone's not good for us, even if they're family. I feel like it's really important that the environment that you're creating. I think oftentimes in our families we have those relatives that might not be good for us. It's probably better for us to not have the relationship, but we continue having it even though it might not be good for us.
This is a very great line that I've heard, was that it's really important not to remember the family you come from, but the family that you create.
Yeah. No, I think that's very powerful, because it's not even, I think they also say don't let the family you come from impact the family that you're going to create. So I feel like it's really important to recognize that with that self-awareness, you do have a choice. You do have a choice, and you just need to be very intentional in recognizing what it is that you want to bring forward and what should be left behind. And that what should be left behind is what we talked about in terms of caring so much about what other people, think, and allowing that to impact our lives, and just realizing that there is more to life than marriage for both men and women. I don't want to leave the men, out of this either, because I'm sure that they feel that pressure as well, like you had mentioned about being successful and being a provider, and that's also a lot of pressure as well.
ਅਸੀਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਵਧੀਆ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ, ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ controversial topic ਤੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ that I feel like nobody has openly talked about it. But before ending this conversation, what would you like to say that what should we encourage more in the Punjabi culture so that our generations can learn only the good thing about our culture?
Yeah, so I think that, oftentimes we can definitely have these conversations about these issues, right? But I think that people need to also do their part. So we talked about holding people accountable. I think that's really important. I think the first step that we've done today is having that self-awareness to recognize that these issues do exist, right? Our culture isn't perfect. We talked about both the good and the bad aspects, but the bad aspects, they affect everyone, right? So I feel like sometimes we have the mentality of if you're not going through something, you might not care about it. But I do think that our Punjabi Virsa, our Punjabi culture, it is up to us to carry that forward, right? Whether that's improving your own Punjabi, so you can teach your kids, or whether that's tackling some of these bigger issues that, we talked about. So I feel like if you have the self-awareness, you have the accountability, and everyone realizes that they need to do their part, then we can definitely make some changes going forward.